My mother leaned close to me on my wedding day, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn my entire childhood like a warning. And she whispered, "You were always the ugly daughter. I don't know how you pulled this off." I was standing outside the bathroom in my wedding dress, veil still perfect, hands shaking underneath the bouquet, and I smiled at her. I actually smiled, because 28 years had trained me to swallow her poison and call it medicine. But here's what she didn't know, what nobody in that reception hall knew yet. In exactly 11 minutes, the DJ was going to play a video I never meant for anyone to see. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of me, alone in my car, 1 year earlier, saying out loud every single thing she had ever made me feel. Every comparison, every whisper, every time she looked at my sister and then looked at me like I was the mistake she never corrected. And every person she had ever performed her wonderful mother act for, every aunt, every cousin, every family friend sitting at those decorated tables, was about to hear all of it. She had spent 28 years making sure her cruelty stayed invisible. It stayed invisible for exactly 11 more minutes. My mother's perfume hit me before her words did. That's the thing nobody tells you about a person who hurts you your whole life. Your body learns to recognize them before your brain does. I was standing just outside the bathroom hallway, my dress gathered in both hands so the hem wouldn't drag on the floor. And the second that scent reached me, Chanel No. 5, the same bottle she'd kept on her vanity my entire life, my stomach dropped. Not because I was nervous, because I knew. Some part of me always knew that she couldn't let me have this one day without taking something from it. She came around the corner looking beautiful. She always looked beautiful. Cream pantsuit, hair done, lipstick perfect. She looked like a woman who had everything under control. She looked at me the way she always looked at me. A quick scan, top to bottom, like she was doing an inventory of everything that wasn't quite right. Then she leaned in close. "You were always the ugly daughter," she whispered. "I don't know how you pulled this off." And I smiled. God help me, I smiled at her. Trained response. 28 years of muscle memory. You learn to smile at the people who hurt you when the alternative, breaking down, screaming, saying what you actually feel, costs more than you have energy left to spend. So I smiled, and she patted my cheek once like she'd just said something kind, and she walked back toward the reception hall like nothing had happened. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just breathing. My name is Delaney. I was 28 years old on my wedding day. I grew up in a small suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, in a house that looked completely normal from the outside. 2-story, white shutters, a garden my mother tended obsessively every spring. From the outside, we were a lovely family. My father was quiet and gentle, and mostly absent in the way that men who marry difficult women tend to become absent. Not physically, but somewhere behind his eyes. My sister Serena was 2 years older than me and had inherited my mother's cheekbones, my mother's ease, my mother's ability to walk into a room and make everyone turn their head. And then there was me. I wasn't ugly. I want to say that clearly because it took me a long time to be able to say it. I was not ugly. But my mother had a gift for making you feel like whatever you were, it wasn't enough. Serena was naturally thin. I was solid. Serena had my mother's straight dark hair. Mine curled and frizzed and took effort. Serena made friends easily. I was too intense. Every difference between us became, in my mother's hands, a ranking. And I was always ranked second. There's a specific memory I keep coming back to. I was maybe 9 years old. A family barbecue, summer, the backyard full of relatives. My aunt had taken a photo of me and Serena together near the picnic table, and she'd said, "Oh, Serena, you're just stunning, honey." And then she looked at me and said, "And Delaney, you have such a great personality." I remember looking at my mother right after, that instinct children have, looking to their parent to fix something. My mother just smiled and said, "She does, doesn't she?" No correction, no Delaney is beautiful too, just that smile. That same smile she'd given me outside the bathroom 30 minutes ago. That was the year I started understanding what I was in our family. Serena wasn't cruel, I want to make that clear too. She wasn't the villain of my childhood. She was just the favorite. And she existed in that position the way people exist in comfort they've never had to question. She didn't make my mother compare us. She didn't ask for the better treatment, the more enthusiastic applause, the way my mother's face genuinely lit up differently when Serena walked into a room. It just was. And I spent years being angry at Serena for something she didn't exactly choose, which was its own kind of complicated grief. My father never intervened. Not once. Not at the barbecue, not at the school recital where my mother talked through my violin solo, to tell the woman next to her about Serena's soccer tournament, not at Thanksgiving when I was 17 and had gotten into the honors program at school, and my mother's response was to immediately pivot to asking Serena about her college applications. He saw it. I know he saw it because sometimes he'd find me afterward, in the kitchen, in my room, and he'd squeeze my shoulder and say, "Your mother doesn't always say things the right way." That was the most he ever gave me. A shoulder squeeze and a vague excuse for a woman who had never needed an excuse a day in her life. I met Marcus when I was 24. He was a structural engineer, originally from Atlanta, had moved to Columbus for work. We met at a friend's birthday dinner. He was somebody's coworker. I was somebody's college friend. And we ended up at the same end of the table talking for 3 hours while the party moved around us. He was the first person I'd ever met who asked me questions and then actually waited for the full answer. Not the polite answer. The full one. 3 months in, I made the mistake of introducing him to my mother. We had dinner at her house, her idea, her territory, her rules. She cooked, which she was genuinely good at, and she was charming in the way she could be charming when she wanted something. But about 40 minutes in, she said to Marcus, casually, like it was a compliment, "You know, I always worried Delaney would have trouble finding someone. She's always been the more challenging one to love." She laughed after she said it. Marcus didn't laugh. He looked at her for a moment, then looked at me, and I saw something move behind his eyes. Not pity, something quieter than that. Recognition, maybe, like he was filing away exactly what he'd just witnessed. He didn't say anything to her that night, but in the car on the way home, he reached over and took my hand and said, "You know that what she said in there was not okay, right?" And I said, "That's just how she is." And he said, "That's not an explanation, Delaney. That's an excuse she's trained you to make for her." I cried the whole drive home, not because I was sad, because nobody had ever said that to me out loud before. We got engaged 14 months later. Marcus proposed on a Tuesday evening, no grand gesture, no restaurant full of strangers watching, just us in our apartment, takeout containers on the coffee table, some documentary playing in the background that neither of us was actually watching. He got down on one knee right there between the couch and the coffee table and said, "I want to spend every ordinary Tuesday with you for the rest of my life." The ring was simple, a thin gold band with a small oval sapphire. He'd remembered me saying once, months earlier, that I'd never understood why diamonds were the default. He'd remembered. That was Marcus. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The happiness lasted about 6 days. That's when I told my mother. She came over for coffee, just her, not Serena, and I showed her the ring and I watched her face. There was a half second, just half a second, where something genuine flickered across her expression, something that might have been real happiness for me. And then it was gone, replaced by that careful, managed smile she wore like a second face. "Well," she said, turning my hand over to look at the ring, "it's small, but it's sweet." That was it. That was her response to her daughter's engagement. It's small, but it's sweet. Marcus had saved for 4 months for that ring. I knew because he'd told me, because he was the kind of man who told me things. I should have made a decision right then. I should have looked at that moment and understood what the next 12 months of wedding planning with my mother involved were going to cost me. But I didn't. Because hope is a stubborn, irrational thing. And I had spent 28 years hoping that one day, she would just choose me. Just once, without condition, without comparison, without that slight curl of disappointment at the corner of her mouth. So I let her in. She inserted herself into the planning, the way she inserted herself into everything, gradually, then all at once. First, it was just opinions. The venue I'd chosen was fine but not impressive. The color palette I'd picked, dusty rose and sage green, was a little trendy, don't you think? It'll look dated in the photos. The caterer I'd booked she had heard mixed things about from someone she couldn't quite name. I absorbed it. I adjusted things. I told myself she was just excited. Then came the DJ situation. About 4 months before the wedding, my mother called me on a Thursday afternoon and told me she had handled the DJ. Her exact word, handled. She said she had a connection through someone at her church, a DJ who did weddings and events, very professional, very experienced. She'd already spoken to him, already given him the general timeline for the reception, already told him what kind of music we wanted. I hadn't told her what kind of music we wanted. Mom, I said carefully, Marcus and I were going to meet with a couple of DJs ourselves this weekend. Delaney, I've already spoken to him. It would be rude to cancel now. Pause. Besides, you always overthink these things. Just let me handle it. And here is the part I am most ashamed of when I look back. I let her. I was so tired. Tired of fighting, tired of the comments, tired of managing her feelings while simultaneously trying to actually plan a wedding, that I said fine. I said fine, and I moved on to the next thing on my list, and I told myself it didn't matter. The DJ was just background. It wasn't the important part. I didn't ask her what she had told him. I didn't follow up. I didn't meet with him myself. I just let her handle it. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant downtown. Marcus's parents had insisted on hosting it, which was one of the few battles that went the right way. His mother, Linda, was a warm, no-nonsense woman from Atlanta who made it clear from their first meeting that she thought Marcus had done extremely well for himself. She said that to my face, directly, the second time we met. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom afterward because I wasn't prepared for how much a simple sentence like that could undo me. The dinner was lovely right up until the toasts. My mother had asked to give one. I hadn't been able to figure out how to say no without starting a war 3 days before my wedding, so I'd said yes. She stood up with her glass of champagne. She looked radiant, of course, cream dress, hair perfect, and she smiled at the room full of people who all thought she was a wonderful woman. She talked about Serena first. Serena wasn't even getting married. She was sitting at the table as a guest, but my mother spent the first 90 seconds of her wedding eve toast talking about how proud she was of Serena's recent promotion, how Serena had always been such a natural at everything she did, how watching Serena grow into the woman she'd become had been one of the greatest joys of her life. Then she turned to me. And Delaney, she said, like I was an afterthought she'd almost forgotten, has always done things her own way. Small pause. We wish her and Marcus all the happiness. That was it. That was my toast. 11 seconds. After 90 seconds on my sister at my rehearsal dinner. The table was quiet for just a beat too long. I saw Linda's jaw tighten slightly. I saw Marcus look down at his plate. I saw Serena staring at the centerpiece like she was trying to disappear into it. I raised my glass and said thank you and smiled. 28 years of muscle memory. That night, back at our apartment, Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me for a long moment and said, "Tomorrow is going to be different. Tomorrow is yours." I nodded. I believed him. I wanted to believe him more than I had wanted anything in a long time. I just had no idea how different tomorrow was actually going to be. The morning of my wedding was the quietest I had felt in months. I woke up before my alarm, 5:53, the sky outside still that deep gray blue that exists right before dawn decides to commit, and I just lay there for a few minutes in the stillness. Marcus was at his brother's place, old tradition, last night apart. The apartment was mine, and quiet, and I could hear nothing except the refrigerator humming and a car passing slowly on the street below. I remember thinking, this is the last morning I wake up, and the day is just a regular day. Tomorrow, everything is different. I wasn't scared. That surprised me. I had expected to be scared. I got up and made coffee and sat by the window and watched Columbus wake up, and for maybe 40 minutes, my mother didn't exist in my mind at all. It was just me and the city, and the fact that I was marrying the best man I had ever known. Then my phone started ringing. Serena, 7:14 in the morning. Mom wants to know if you've confirmed the florist delivery time. Not good morning, not how are you feeling, just, Mom wants to know. I confirmed the florist delivery time. The getting ready suite at the hotel was full of warmth and chaos in the best way. My two closest friends, Priya and Becca, were there. Serena came later. Linda stopped by with a small velvet box that contained a delicate gold bracelet that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. She pressed it into my hands and said, "She would have loved you. I'm certain of it." I had to turn toward the window for a moment. Old habit, hiding my face when something cracked me open unexpectedly. My mother arrived at 10:30. She came in already talking, something about the centerpieces not being quite right. Had anyone checked, she'd specifically told them about the height. She moved through the room rearranging the energy the way she always did, pulling focus without appearing to try. She looked at my dress and said, "Very classic," which from her meant nothing positive and nothing negative. Just acknowledged, processed, filed away. Priya caught my eye across the room and gave me one slow blink that said, I see it. I'm watching. You're okay. The ceremony itself was at 2 o'clock. Small venue, exposed brick, tall windows, afternoon light coming in at that golden angle that makes everything look like a memory, even while it's happening. 63 people. Everyone we actually wanted there. No one we'd invited out of obligation. Marcus cried when I walked in. Not dramatically. He didn't sob. He wasn't shaking. His eyes just filled up, and one tear made it down the left side of his face before he pressed his lips together and held it. His best man handed him a handkerchief without looking at him, the easy practiced movement of a man who knew his friend well. I laughed a little when I saw it. Marcus laughed too. The officiant gave us a patient smile and waited, the vows we wrote ourselves. Marcus went first. He talked about the dinner party where we met, about the 3 hours of conversation, and then he said, I knew that night that you were someone who lived all the way inside her own life, and I wanted to be someone who got to stand next to that. I held myself together until the last line. I did not hold myself together at the last line. My vows were shorter. I had written and rewritten them 11 times. What I finally said was this. I spent a long time believing that I was the difficult one to love. You didn't argue with me about that. You just loved me so easily and so completely that eventually I had to update my information. More laughter, more tears. Good ones, the kind that feel like release rather than loss. We were married at 2:47 in the afternoon. The reception was in the adjoining hall, same venue, transformed with lights and flowers and round tables full of people who were genuinely happy to be there. The first hour was everything I had imagined. Cocktails, laughter, the warmth of being surrounded by people who loved both of us. Marcus kept his hand at the small of my back every time he was near me, this quiet, anchoring gesture that I felt in my whole body. I was happy. Genuinely, fully happy. That's the part that still gets me when I think about it. I was standing in the middle of my own happiness when she found me. I had slipped into the small hallway that connected the reception hall to the restrooms, just for a moment, just to catch my breath, fix my lipstick, be alone inside my own head for 60 seconds. The noise of the reception was muffled behind the door. I was exhaling. And then I smelled it. Chanel number 5. She came around the corner and looked at me the way she had my whole life. That inventory scan, top to bottom, assessing. My dress, my hair, my face. And then something shifted in her expression. Not cruelty exactly, something more complicated than that. Something that looked almost like grief, except pointed outward instead of inward. The way her emotions always were. She leaned in close. You were always the ugly daughter, she said quietly. I don't know how you pulled this off. And I stood there, in my wedding dress, holding my lipstick, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not devastation, not even anger, something colder and quieter than both, a kind of final clarity, like the last piece of a puzzle you'd been building your whole life clicking into place, and the completed picture being exactly as ugly as you'd always suspected. I smiled. I said nothing. She patted my cheek and walked back toward the noise. I stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time, but was probably 90 seconds. Then I squared my shoulders and I walked back into my reception. 4 minutes later, the DJ's voice came through the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very special video presentation for the bride and groom. This one comes from someone who loves them very much. I stopped walking. I had not arranged any video. Marcus was across the room, already turning toward the screen with a curious smile, assuming I had planned a surprise. I watched his face. I watched the screen. The room went quiet in that anticipatory way rooms do when something is about to happen, and then the video started. It was my car, my dashboard, my face, no makeup, hair pulled back, eyes red from crying. I was sitting in a parking lot somewhere and the timestamp in the corner read 14 months ago, and I was talking. Directly into my phone camera. Talking in the way you only talk when you are absolutely certain no one will ever hear you. My own voice filled the reception hall. I don't know how to explain what it feels like to grow up being the one your mother looks at like a problem she never solved. The room was completely still. I couldn't move. My feet were on the floor of my own wedding reception and I could not move them. The video kept playing. My own voice, raw and unfiltered, filling every corner of that beautifully decorated room. And I stood there like someone had reached into my chest and pressed pause on everything except my heartbeat. She has never once looked at me the way she looks at Serena. Not once. And I keep waiting for it. I am 27 years old, and I am still waiting for my mother to look at me like I am enough, like I am not the version of her daughter she settled for. I heard someone at a nearby table make a soft sound. Not a laugh, the opposite of a laugh. My eyes found Marcus first. He was standing near the bar, completely still, his champagne glass held loosely at his side, and he was watching the screen with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Something between devastation and fury, held together by a thin layer of absolute composure. He felt me looking at him. He turned. His eyes found mine across the room, and he took one step toward me before I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. I needed to stay standing on my own for this. My eyes moved to my mother. She was seated at the family table, third from the left, and she was watching the screen with an expression I can only describe as the face of someone watching their own house burn down from the inside. Completely still, champagne glass untouched. Her jaw was set in that rigid way she always held herself when she was working very hard not to show what she was feeling. But her eyes were doing something I had never seen them do before. They were afraid. The video kept going. She told Marcus's mother that I was the challenging one to love. She said it like a joke, like it was just a funny little observation about her own daughter. And Marcus's mother looked uncomfortable, and I laughed along because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. I make it easy for her to hurt me by pretending it doesn't. Linda. I found Linda 3 tables over. She was sitting very straight, her hands folded on the table in front of her, watching the screen. As if she felt my eyes, she turned toward me, and she gave me one slow, deliberate nod. I see you. I always saw you. Her expression said both things at once. 4 minutes and 37 seconds. That's how long the video was. I know because I made it. I just never made it for this room. I had recorded it alone in the parking lot of a grocery store 14 months ago, the week after that dinner at my mother's house, where she had told Marcus I was the challenging one to love. I had sat in my car after doing the grocery run, and I had just talked into my phone because I had no other container for what I was feeling, and I needed to put it somewhere outside my own body. I had never shown it to anyone, not Marcus, not Priya, not Serena. The video ended. The room stayed quiet for 3 full seconds, that specific silence that happens when a group of people are all processing the same thing simultaneously and no one wants to be the first to break it. Then Priya started crying, quietly, into her napkin, but I saw her shoulders shaking. Becca had her arm around her. Marcus was already moving toward me. And my mother stood up. I watched her stand. I watched her arrange her face into that expression, the one she used for damage control, the one that was almost an apology but angled just enough to still make herself the reasonable one. She opened her mouth. That was clearly taken out of context. Vivian. It was Linda. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Sit down. My mother looked at Linda. Linda looked back at her with the calm, immovable expression of a woman who had raised 3 sons and attended 30 years of school board meetings and had absolutely no interest in performance. My mother sat down. It was Serena who came to me first. She crossed the room quickly, and her face was not the face of someone who had just watched chaos unfold. It was the face of someone who had been holding something for a very long time and had just put it down. She stopped in front of me and she said, I gave him the video. The room was still close enough to quiet that people heard her say it. I found it, she said, on your old laptop when you had me grab your charger from your apartment last month. I watched it, and Her voice broke slightly. She pressed on. I've watched her do this our whole lives, and I never said anything, and I didn't know how to fix 28 years of not saying anything, and I thought, she stopped, started again. I thought if she had to hear it in a room where she couldn't control the story. Serena, I said. I'm sorry. If I made it worse, I'm so sorry. Serena, I said her name again, softer this time. I know. I did know. I couldn't explain exactly how, but I knew, standing there in my wedding dress in the silence after the storm, that whatever Serena had done, she had done it the only way she knew how to after a lifetime of her own complicated guilt. It was messy, and it was imperfect, and it had just detonated in the middle of my wedding reception. But the truth was out, 11 minutes too late for my mother to stop it. I looked across the room at her. She was still seated. The champagne glass was still untouched. She was looking at me with that expression I had waited my whole life to see on her face. Not love. I wasn't naive enough to expect love. but accountability. The look of someone who has run out of room to maneuver. I walked over to her table. I stood in front of her and I kept my voice very quiet and very steady, and I said, I'm not going to make a scene at my own wedding, but I want you to hear me clearly. I paused. We are done, not angry done, not door slamming done, just done. I'm not available for this anymore. Any of it. She opened her mouth. I don't need a response, I said. I really don't. And I turned around and walked back to my husband. Marcus put both arms around me and held on, and I pressed my face into his shoulder and I breathed. Just breathed. The DJ, to his absolute credit, read the room perfectly and put on something slow and warm, and the reception gradually, gently came back to life around us. My mother left 40 minutes later. I didn't watch her go. Someone told me afterward. I think it was Becca. And I nodded and felt nothing that needed immediate attention. That was 8 months ago. I don't speak to my mother now. Not in a dramatic way. No final letter, no long phone call full of things we both needed to say. I just stopped being available. Stopped answering calls that required me to be smaller than I was. It turns out that when you remove yourself quietly from a dynamic that depended on your participation, the whole structure loses its power. She has nothing to push against. There's nothing to manage. I'm simply not there. Serena and I talk now. Really talk. The kind of conversations I didn't know we were capable of having because we'd spent so long existing in assigned roles in someone else's story. She's in therapy. So am I. We are figuring out, slowly and imperfectly, what it means to be sisters outside of our mother's narrative. Marcus asked me recently, on a regular Tuesday evening, takeout containers on the coffee table, what I wished had been different. I thought about it for a long time. I wish I'd known earlier, I finally said, that her version of me was never the accurate one. He nodded like he'd been waiting for me to get there. I'm not all the way healed. I don't think there's an all the way when the wound started that early. But I am different now. Different in the way that only happens when the thing you've been afraid of finally arrives and you survive it. When the worst thing she could have said to you gets said in your wedding dress and you are still standing, still breathing, still married to a man who looked at you across a burning room and just waited because he knew you could handle it. Turns out he was right. Turns out I always could.